I am going live for the first time ever for the State of Mind radio podcast. And it is pretty amazing. It's been a long time coming. And I'm really excited to be sharing this airwave and this room with the wonderful people at Radio Regent. And here we go. So I'm a bit of a rookie, so please bear with me. And otherwise, I'm going to get right into it. So my name is Mike Stroh. I started something called Starts With Me, which is a mental health advocacy, education, and event business. And we do a lot of work with schools, in the workplace, with nonprofit organizations, and families and individuals. And our main purpose is to increase people's capacity for well-being. And what we are going to talk about on this show is: what is mental health? What is mental illness? What is recovery? What is well-being? What is addiction? And what do all these things mean? And what do they look like in people's lives? And I think that conversation doesn't have much depth to it in today's, hoopla around mental health and the importance of it. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to bring that to everybody in a different way. And I hope that it is helpful. We will have a lot of guests from individuals who've gone through their own struggles to medical professionals, doctors, nurses, social workers, occupational therapists, and etc. And also family members and parents. And we really are hoping to deepen the conversation to help people identify with others, and hopefully through that identification, seek hope, seek inspiration, and possibly also resources and insights, and help find a way through their struggles or share their joys, whatever the case may be. And the name State of Mind is named after our annual festival, which is a culmination of all the work we do with the kids in high school and increasingly into the junior school grades. And we have, over the years with teachers, created curriculums. So we come in, do work in schools, and the students get graded on it, which is really incredible. Then they submit that to the festival, and then they come and have a celebration during Mental Health Awareness Week. And that's we've had 2 thus far, and that's super duper exciting. Another thing we're doing with Radio Regent, we are partnering with the youth-run Catch the Flavor Radio, which is also really cool. So all of the Starts With Me speakers are going to be supporting a portion of their weekly radio show discussing all things mental health, well-being, substance use, sexual behavior, all the things that young people are dealing with today. And so that is also Tuesday evening. So if anybody has more interest in following the conversation with more of a youth lens, I suggest you check that out. So because it's the first time ever, I'm just going to go through our general outline presentation of what this looks like when we're presenting our work. And since I am all by my lonesome, I won't have a guest today, but I'll tell you a little bit about my own story, and then we'll probably be done. So the first thing we always say when presenting or when talking about mental health to an audience is, until me personally, until I could understand that I really was the ultimately responsible for taking care of myself, I had no chance. And I often like to use the quote, or at least the quote attributed to Gandhi, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." I used to point the finger in every direction. It's my parents' fault, it's my teacher's fault, it's the government's fault, it's capitalism's fault, whoever it is that I wanted to blame for my problems, instead of, having the opportunity to understand that really at the bottom of it all, it was up to me. And so that is an incredibly difficult lesson to learn. And if I didn't have a tremendous amount of support to help me learn it, then I wouldn't be sitting here today. So there's a balance between, people being responsible and taking agency over their lives, and the need for people to help them along to do that. And now, over the years, I think personally I am, and also the sort of crew that's developing around Starts With Me, I think we're in a position to start doing that, and that's really exciting, and that's what we're out here to do. So be the change you wish to see in the world. It's a good place to start, rather than expecting other people to do it for you. Okay? So I guess outside of this radio booth, we work with both the school boards in the city. We, as individuals, do a lot of work at CAMH for a high school program called Beyond the Cuckoo's Nest, which was the foundational program, and I always bug them about it, but probably in the world, certainly I would say in Canada, 30 years ago, nurses and clinicians partnered with clients to help reduce stigma in high schools. And 30 years later, still a wonderful program. Still, they see, probably a few thousand kids a year and share the message. It's really awesome. So beyond that, we've worked with the Schizophrenia Society of Ontario, St. Michael's Hospital, Canadian Mental Health Association, the Mood Disorders Association, the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Collectively, we do a lot of stuff now in the corporate world, which is super exciting. And we are just on the tip of doing a really amazing workshop or training with some City of Toronto staff who work with young people. And that is also incredibly exciting. And it's another sign that collectively we are understanding how important this stuff is, and we're trying to figure out the best way to go about helping people learn about it. So again, it kind of goes back to, I'm in an interesting position. I have personal experience, I have family experience, I'm also a parent. I'm engaged with the schools as a parent, as, I guess, an advocate and educator. I'm sort of come at this from lots of different angles, and so sometimes I have to remember what hat I'm wearing and what perspective I'm trying to advocate for. But primarily, I always advocate for either people taking it upon themselves to help themselves first so that they can help others, and then using that strength to help other people do the same. And if we look at globally, okay, the World Health Organization says depression is the number one cause of disability worldwide. Depression is the number one cause of disability worldwide, and that is hard to believe. Knowing that, and also knowing how, I guess you would say, unbalanced wealth and security and access to resources and all that thing is across the world, it's hard to grasp that, in certain areas of the world, no doubt, particularly in places that are experiencing war or like serious environmental degradation or lack of food and etc., the rates are higher. But generally, it doesn't matter where you live. The rates of depression are pretty consistent across the world, and that is astounding to me. So I do think, for the most part, people, doctors, the medical system, academics, everybody is doing the best they can with what they have. And that is something that I often have to remind myself of when I get caught in those patterns of second guessing or wondering how and why and all this stuff. Why is it happening? Why aren't things getting better? But if you stop and think, things actually are getting a lot better. And the mental health system seems to be changing. And a lot of that's because of wonderful advocates and wonderful people out there working their butts off to make it happen. A big word you'll often hear in the mental health space is stigma. Stigma is sort of the big, I don't know what it is, the boogie word for mental health. And to me, well, first of all, stigma is just another word for discrimination, basically. And in a mental health context, that means, prejudice or treating people with mental illnesses differently than you would treat a quote-unquote normal person. I think the stigma discussion could be a little more thorough and a little more have a depth to it that's not currently happening. So how I would add to that is, here's how I see stigma play out. In this, replace the word stigma with prejudice, discrimination, whatever it is. But in terms of mental health or mental illness, you see somebody on the street who is behaving in a way, maybe it's not on the street, maybe it's in your family, in the school, whatever. You see them behaving in a certain way. You don't like how they are behaving. So instantly, your mind creates a judgment about them. And in this case, usually it's bad. Other person, bad. I don't like it. So then the next stage of that is you make more judgments, or kind of you create ideas about what that person is, why you don't like them, what makes you better than them, or what makes you need to move away from them. And so you start to create a story in your head that creates a separation between you and them. Then you can justify putting them down. You can justify, possibly a negative way of treating them. And then you just go on with your life. And that's kind of how stigma plays out in the mental health context. And, one thing that doesn't enter the conversation is our brains have evolved to label people. That's what our brains do, or that's one of the jobs. Our brains are constantly thinking, nonstop, all day long, thoughts, judgments, interpretations. We're judging the world. We're doing all those things nonstop. So it's actually quite normal to have judgment. And I'll talk about it more later, but I don't like this idea of don't be judgmental. Your brain's job is to be judgmental. So I like to say, when you notice yourself being judgmental, that's where you have the choice, or that's where you have the opportunity to then take different actions or say different words, or, whatever it is. And that's how we create a better world. That's how we become more compassionate. It's not about telling each other what to do. So back to the stigma. We're judging this person. We're creating stories in our head. We're separating them from us. And then we put them down. And what that does is it makes us feel better about ourselves. And what's really going on is that we see someone behaving in a way, and our evolved animal brain says that is dangerous. And we put up the defenses. And then we go on with our life. And that's a very normal thing to happen for the brain. And so as we sort of evolve, or as, depending on how you look at it, as we become more thoughtful and compassionate and et cetera in this world, and as our prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain, or the higher thinking part of our brain, develops and evolves, the hope is that we can behave in more compassionate ways. So when we see these people, or we see someone who does something that we don't like and it scares us, the more evolved part of our brain, which is called the prefrontal cortex, shuts down, and our animal instincts take over. And we can't be compassionate, and we can't be thoughtful, and we can't be caring. So it's actually quite normal when people get into hostile situations, or when they get angry or anxious or scared or whatever, that they behave in these ways. It's actually very normal, and it's to be expected. So, oh my goodness gracious. I'm trying to film this and I just screwed something up. Anyhow, so that's what happens. And that's my little spiel on stigma. So stigma is kind of the normal process of your unconscious brain. And when we become more conscious and become more self-aware, we can start to notice when we're being judgmental. And by doing that, then we can start to make different choices about how we're treating that person, or whatever it is. So what starts to happen personally, at least for me, I'll get into my story a wee bit. I'd say about around the age of 12 was when the first time I really started noticing that I felt different. I felt uncomfortable in my own skin. And when I went to school, or when I was around my friends, I would look at them and I would think to myself, wow, that person has something that I don't have. Or those people know something that I don't know. And what I thought they knew was how to feel okay. I thought they knew how to ask their teachers questions, or how to speak up in class, or how to, just navigate the world in a way that made them feel okay. And I certainly didn't think that I knew how to do that. And I was so young, and these conversations weren't happening. And so I thought, I did have an older brother. And so generally when you have an older sibling, you potentially can be introduced to things sooner than other people. And I thought it was a brilliant idea to start experimenting with drugs, because I didn't know what else to do, and I desperately wanted to know how to feel better. And I experimented with marijuana. That didn't work the first time. So then I decided I'm going to try magic mushrooms. I don't even think I knew what the hell they were, but I basically had a drug-induced psychotic episode on magic mushrooms when I was 12 years old. And that paved the way for the rest of my days dealing with drug addiction and mental illness. And what happened at that time was I learned, or sort of another one of my coping skills or learned behaviors, was to lie. So for anybody out there who has kids, or anyone who's familiar with kids, when kids learn to lie, or that it's even possible to manipulate reality, it's actually quite an incredibly profound experience. It's like, oh my goodness, I can manipulate the universe. Wow. And then, hopefully we learn that that's probably not the best thing to do. But for people in my situation, at least for me, I was so scared of getting in trouble. I was so scared of being honest and dealing with my problems that lying became a quick fix. It's almost as if it's an addiction. It offers instant relief, although you feel awkward while doing it, to get away from your problems or avoid facing consequences. So that's when I started to learn to lie as a coping skill. And throughout my journey, the person I lied to the most was certainly myself. But that was kind of how I got through difficult times. And of course, a 12, 13-year-old kid, to deal with my problems, I needed some revenue, and I could only steal so much money from my mom without getting in trouble. I could only manage to do a little bit of part-time work. So I basically started selling drugs, and I was then arrested and convicted of trafficking marijuana when I was 16. And again, got in trouble and just lied. I lied because I didn't know how to face my issues. And at the time, we didn't, in fairness to the adults in the world, at that time at least, we didn't have these conversations. We didn't know how to deal with this stuff. Our approach was always, you're bad, you need to be punished, and you need to deal with the consequences of that. Now, I do think that is important, but what is more important, especially with young people, is that we try to understand why they are behaving the way they are behaving. Doesn't mean we condone their behavior, doesn't mean we let them off the hook, but if we don't understand why, and if we don't help them try to understand why, then nothing gets better. No one gets anywhere. And we're still not great at that. And so that's part of what we're trying to do, is help people understand the why behind the behavior. And it kind of goes back to that stigma thing. We see people behaving in a certain way, we don't like it, we push them aside, we create judgments, we create labels, and then we live out this story in our heads or in our thoughts that creates a separate other, and it allows us to dehumanize our relationship with them, and in which case we can't treat them in a way that is most helpful to them and to us, and in the bigger picture to everybody. So after I got convicted, I was still sort of selling drugs and in deep, deep darkness personally. A lot of the people around me were in similar places. And I started to, now looking back, basically the people I hung out with, the places that I went, and the things that I did were pretty much entirely based on whether or not I could get and stay high. And that is a horrible, horrible way to live. Now, I primarily was high on marijuana, literally 24 hours a day from about 13 to 30 years old. And with the coming legislation, it's just interesting. I am 100% in favor of legislation. I think it's definitely long overdue. I don't think marijuana is bad. I just think for people like myself, it was bad. And I couldn't, smoke it like a normal person. There's a funny joke. Some people say, if I could smoke weed like a normal person, I'd smoke it every day. And so, anyhow, I can't. And that's okay with me. I'm actually quite happy with the way I live my life today. And I did lots of other drugs, and I tried desperately to be an alcoholic. But for some reason, people differ in their substances of choice. Alcohol made me sick all the time, and I vomited, and I prayed to the porcelain gods over and over that I would never do it again. And of course, the next weekend, if I could stomach shoving it down my throat, I would drink it. And, I did other drugs, but I do distinctly remember, and this is another sign of somebody who's likely has some substance use issues, at least in my case and in many other people I know, is that we rationalize, justify, and minimize what we're doing. So my justification for being high 24 hours a day was, at least I'm not going to die. Because I know if I get high 24 hours a day on the other substances that I occasionally did, that I would probably die. And so that's a good example of really dysfunctional thinking. And that's how I kind of went about my merry way. And any time that this sort of behavior or this addiction would get in the way of my life, I would rationalize it or minimize its negative effects. And I would always basically live in the future, or I would live a lie that said, it's okay that I'm doing this because one day I'll be better, or one day I'll get my life together, or one day I'll do this, or one day I'll do that. And it basically keeps you stuck in denial. And a great acronym for denial is don't even notice I am lying. It's a beauty. So there I was in denial, in a cloud of smoke. I was asked to leave my first high school, and I went to a second high school where if you showed up, you would pass. If you did a tiny bit of work, you'd probably get a C. And if you did a tiny bit more, you'd maybe get a C plus or a B. And I lied my way through OAC. So I was one of the later grade 13 people. Squeezed into university. And that is sort of when more of my mental health or mental illness symptoms, if you will, started to influence my life. I went to a university that was quite politically active in Montreal, Concordia, and the 9/11 attacks happened. And then I started obsessing about the world and politics and why everything was going to hell in a handbasket. And then my brother, my older brother, had his first psychotic episode and became, I guess, was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So all these things are happening. My world is crashing in around me. And I guess this is maybe when other symptoms or diagnoses of mental illnesses started to become a big part of my life. So depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive thinking, and, drug addiction, in my opinion, is a form of obsessive compulsive disorder. Although I should probably look in my DSM-5, which is the book that psychiatrists use to diagnose people, to see if they would agree. I don't know. And I was really scared. I didn't know what the hell was going on. My brother was quite ill at the time, and it was really scary. And again, these conversations weren't happening. I had no coping skills. I didn't know what the hell to do. And I do remember going to my university counseling office, I guess it was. And this was my only experience ever with a mental health professional, I guess, up until the day that it all ended for me. And I remember going into his office and talking for a little while, and to me, the problem was I had finally got a date with this girl that I had been, I guess, pursuing in my thoughts. She was a lovely person and quite beautiful. And I, for the first time in my life, couldn't get an erection. And it just wasn't working. And obviously that had a lot to do with the personal issues and family issues that were going on. And to me, though, it had nothing to do with that. I just didn't get it. It's like, why isn't this working? This should be working. It's always worked. This is really annoying. And so the I think he was a psychiatrist because he offered me medication, but he said to me, maybe something's going on. Maybe there are other issues happening in your life that are influencing your sexual performance or whatever. And he mentioned antidepressants and some other things, and I just wasn't hearing it. And so this is another example of somebody who is not well, is that I thought my problems were that I couldn't get an erection and get with this girl. But really, my problems were deeply rooted mental illness and mental health and addiction problems. But I just couldn't see it. I couldn't accept it, whatnot. I just sort of thought why isn't this guy just helping me get with this girl? I mean, that's what I want. I don't want to deal with my issues. And so literally, I basically just walked out of his office, and I never sought support again until, like I said, the very end. So another example of, when we're in real distress or when we're in rough shape, it's so difficult for us to see things clearly, especially when you're high all the time. I mean, you're basically living in a mild form of drug-induced psychosis, a break from reality. You're kind of just in la-la land all the time, and you can't see things for how they really are. So off I went. I managed to, at the end of it, sort of cheated my way through the end of university. And then off I went into the world, which I think was around the time that Radio Regent Park started to become something. And I sort of was caught in this weird place of trying to pursue interests in the world, but just being shackled by my need to be high 24 hours a day, because I couldn't stand 1 second in my skin without self-medicating through drugs. I was so uncomfortable. It was just horrible. And so I couldn't really pursue anything, because anything that got in the way of me getting high 24/7 had to go. And usually to pursue things of interest and that are meaningful, chances are being high all the time is not going to help, at least certainly for me. So this was also a time that I started learning about my family history. So it is important to know about family history when, for any health issue, okay? It's helpful to know so that when signs come up for you or somebody else in your family, you can say, oh, that might look like this. If you have diabetes in your family, you know what to look out for. So my paternal grandfather died by suicide, and he had a lobotomy. So back in the 50s, I think it was, that was how they thought they could help people with mental illness. And evidently that didn't work. And he took his life, shortly after that, as far as I know. Timelines might be a little bit skewed, but then, and also my mom's side, she had 7 sisters, and my maternal grandfather, I think, had some alcohol issues, and I'm sure there were other mental health things going on. But so it's kind of in my blood, it's in my genes, it's in my family. So that doesn't mean it's going to happen to you or your kids. Doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you might want to be a little more aware of what's happening, because that can make a big difference. So, at the same time, I'm trying to make my way through the world, and my brother's sort of still in and out of care. He would get apprehended by the police sometimes, and I would often have to go with my mom to the hospital, or I'd go on my own to convince him to seek, take care or get help. If he was apprehended by the police, sometimes I'd have to go see him in jail and convince him to transfer the mental health courts, and, just total madness, absolute madness. It was really rough. And I also lived with him for quite a while. And it's kind of, just the definition of madness. And again, on the surface, I could pretend things were okay. I would compare myself to my brother and say, well, at least I'm not like that. All kinds of really dysfunctional, not good ways of looking at yourself or the world. And things did not get better. But one thing that at this point did start to happen, which was, a big turning point, I guess, for me, is my brother and I, one of the few things we could do together was play cards. So we started playing cards. We started playing poker. This was sort of around the time of poker being popular. And we started to win. And then my brother said we should put some money on the internet. And we did. And so fast forward 5 years or so, I had become a really good online poker player. And I started to make pretty good amount of money. And I started to sort of travel around, did poker tournaments, and I spent a lot of time in Las Vegas. And it kind of actually helped me quite a bit. I started to have some sense of self-worth, self-confidence. I thought, wow, I actually am not a pathetic human being, and I actually can do something with my life. Or if I put my focus and energy on something, then maybe I'll get somewhere. So, it was kind of a weird contradiction because it allowed me to stay high all the time because I had money. It allowed me to lock myself in an apartment, basically, and not have to engage with the world, which is something I always really desperately wanted to do. But it did allow me to sort of build up some sense of, self-confidence. And I was pretty good. And I had friends that were really good. And, with their help and my own intense work ethic, I started to think that I didn't have to be a miserable drug addict anymore. And what fast forwarded that whole process was I met a girl at a friend's wedding. And through that relationship, again, I sort of came face to face with denial. I would behave in certain ways and she would say, "What the hell are you doing? You said you were going to do one thing and you're doing the opposite." And that kind of made me look a little bit more honestly at myself. And, I'm a sensitive person for the most part. And all I ever wanted in life was to feel okay. Just like everybody else. We want to feel okay. We want to know that we have community, that we have love, that we have, friendships and etc. And without that, we're pretty miserable. So I kind of thought, wow, if I don't change, I may not have those things. And because I was making money, and on the surface, I could hold it together relatively well, relatively, we thought it was a good idea to get married. And somehow we got married. And anyway, fast forward not too long into the marriage, it was clear that I was a real bloody disaster because now I had more responsibilities. We had bought a house and my wife was trying to start a business. And so I was just swimming or drowning in responsibilities that I couldn't handle. And I started needing to it was just a bloody mess. So for the first time in my entire life, I asked for help. I had had suicidal thoughts throughout my life. I had had, moments of real fear and terror of what might happen to me. And those started coming back. And I knew that this was potentially my last chance, or who knows. So I called somebody who I knew was similar to me, and now he was a drug addiction counselor, and he helped me. It was quite amazing. So we got together and he brought his little checklist. He's like, "We have to do a formal assessment." And so he's check. Yeah, it seems like you have a problem, Mike. Yeah, no kidding. So he said, "Call this number." Of a hospital. I checked myself into an outpatient program at St. Joe's Hospital. And I'll never forget the conversation with this lady. At the program, she said, "Michael, you have to be sober for 72 hours before you come here." And I thought to myself, Jesus, 72 hours. I can't be sober for 72 minutes. And if I could, I would not be calling to get help. But for whatever reason, that was the first time in my entire life, at least that I can remember, where that sack of bricks that I'd been dragging around my whole life started to loosen. It was really just such an incredible sense of relief. And I had tried to stop so many times. I did everything that, a lot of people describe in these environments of flushing it down the toilet, stashing it in the backyard, giving it to friends, whatever it is. I'd done all that over and over for years, and it didn't work. So for some reason, this felt real. And I gave this guy a really big hug, and I was crying, intense sort of joy and relief and hope and whatnot. And that was sort of when it all began to change, which was, on November 2nd, it will be 7 years. And that's a pretty miraculous thing. So I I waved the white flag. I decided to stop digging my own grave, and off I went to get help. And early on in this process, I met this guy named Jeremy, and this guy, Jeremy, saved my life. He really did. I owe pretty much almost everything, or a huge, incredible debt of gratitude to this guy. And he taught me how to start taking responsibility for myself. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. We have to teach people that they are ultimately responsible for themselves and how they engage with the world, because that's the only place, in my opinion, that real substantial change happens. And when we change as individuals from the inside out, then the world around us changes. And that is something that people just can't seem to get. It's very difficult to understand that. But once you experience that truth, life will never be the same, and you'll feel quite liberated and empowered. And so that's what we have to help people do, in my opinion. So this guy, Jeremy, he held my hand. I owe everything to that guy. So I literally called him every day for a couple years. I would have full-on adult temper tantrums. I was just a bloody mess. I was a 13-year-old kid in a 30-year-old man's body. And I had to learn how to be a human being. And I slowly, I got on a wait list for government-covered psychotherapy, which took, I think it was about 18 months, or around 18 months, 2 years. I don't remember exactly. I got a psychiatrist. I got a marriage counselor because, people in my situation often have those issues. And that was incredibly helpful. And I also found a mindfulness doctor. So I started to build what I like to call this sort of superhero squad. I have this superhero squad of people that have helped me tremendously along my journey. And because of that, I'm now able to help other people. I'm also currently studying a master's in counseling psychology, which is somewhat hard to fathom considering where I've been. And it's amazing. And so those are kind of the things, the main things that are most important to me are, if I don't take care of myself first, then I'm of no use to anyone else. It's kind of the analogy of the airplane going down, Put your air mask on first before you help your neighbor. Because if you can't breathe, then how the hell are you going to help somebody else? Another thing that Jeremy drilled into my head early on for me was, if you don't make taking care of yourself the most important thing you will ever do, then you'll lose everything else in your life. So that means if I put my job in front of taking care of myself, or if I put my relationships or friendships, then I'll lose them because I won't be a human being that's worthy of those relationships. Or I'll be behaving in a way that I wouldn't expect anybody to want to have a relationship with me. So I took that super duper seriously. I had been in incredible suffering for way too long, and I really I still to this day do anything I possibly can to take care of myself. And that's kind of the message that I hope to pass on to other people, and that I hope other people learn. So the foundations of that for me are, number one, honesty. If we can't be honest with ourselves, then we have no chance. So how can we help each other become more honest with ourselves? And again, it goes back to this. You have to embody the things that you expect other people to do. And that's what I think is lost a lot in this mental health conversation, is that a lot of the advocacy, or a lot of the conversation, is on, the system has to change, and this has to change, and that has to change. But nobody ever talks about they have to change. You have to look in the mirror and start there. Can't go and fix a broken system with the broken people that created it. So, that's kind of a spin on, I think, at least a quote attributed to Einstein. We can't fix today's problems with the same thinking that created them. So I don't necessarily align myself with this whole cry for more funding and this and that, because it's sort of the way the system is structured and the way we as humans think and interact with each other that's the problem. So pouring money on a broken system is not going to help. So we got to change ourselves first. And by doing that, then the things that we create are thus different. And that all starts with honesty. And so if we can be honest, then we can have hope. Wow, I am changing. I am a different person through this practice of honesty. And I actually can believe that I have hope that things will be different and change. And that's pretty exciting. I wonder what that could be like over the span of many years. I love this quote from Tony Robbins. People overestimate what they can do in 1 year, and they underestimate what they can do in 10. That's a wonderful quote. So we got honesty, we got hope, and then we can start to build faith. So faith in this context personally means even though the practice of honesty and hope doesn't always bring me what I want it to bring me, and it doesn't mean the suffering goes away and life gets horrible and awful and just you kind of want to crawl out of your skin or whatever it is, the suffering doesn't go away, but our ability to deal with it gets stronger. And so the faith kind of helps hold on to that or believe that that is the best way forward, because going back to how we were in the past is not a good option, at least for me. So we got honesty, we got hope, we got faith. Then we can start to have courage. We think, oh my gosh, this is working. I can do something and I'm going to do it. And that courage is big. And for me, the courage meant looking in the mirror and emptying out that closet. Emptying out that skeleton closet of all the past shame, all the past guilt, all the remorse, all the horrible things I had thought and done and experienced. That has to get cleaned out. And that's another thing that I think the mental health system, particularly the peer support world, which I'm in many ways a part of, we don't hold each other accountable for these more serious, more deeply rooted methods of healing, which I think we need to be doing. But anyhow, that's another conversation for another day. So we need that courage to face ourselves. I guess as Carl Jung says, what does he call it? Our shadow self or our dark side, or I can't remember exactly what he calls it, but we need to face that stuff. And we need to learn to forgive ourselves, which is another big thing. And by doing that, we start to build integrity. Right? I'm living my life according to these guidelines: honesty, hope, faith, and courage. And by doing that, I become an expression of integrity. And that's an incredibly powerful thing for people to experience. At least I know it is for me. And it's not I'm better than you, or I'm better this, I'm better than that. It's I'm living in accordance to these values because I know it's the best thing for me, and I think that it's going to be helpful for other people. And by doing that practice and having guidance from people that are maybe more advanced in it than you are, you start to learn some humility. Humility is probably that, and gratitude might just be some of the biggest things missing from, I don't know how to say it, Canadian society, maybe. We have it so good. Yes, there are problems. Yes, there's all kinds of things we need to fix. Absolutely. But compared to history and just, how things have been in the past, we have it pretty darn good. So let's show some bloody gratitude for that. And humility in my case means not thinking I have all the answers, listening to people, shutting my mouth, taking advice, dealing with criticism, all those kind of things, I really had to learn that lesson big time. So we got honesty, hope, faith, courage, integrity, humility, and maybe another one is willingness. I'm doing all these things, but the main reason they work is because I'm willing to continue doing them. And when things get hard, I have the willingness to keep going, to keep asking for help, to keep checking myself, to keep, a self-reflective process of, oh, maybe I did make a mistake and maybe I'd better go frickin' say sorry for that. or whatever it is. And that sort of the next thing is responsibility. We got to get responsible for our behaviors and our actions. So start to take responsibility for things. I start to make amends, start to live in a way that embodies these principles, and life continues to get better. Now, an apology is, I guess, saying sorry. But the difference between an apology and an amends is that an amends is living in a way that no longer makes it necessary to apologize. These are two really big things. And we don't have the time to talk about it now, but I will spend a lot of time talking about those things. So we got honesty, hope, faith, courage, integrity, willingness, humility, responsibility. What do you got? Number 9 on the list is practice. You got to practice these things every day. You got to live these things. They're not just nice words that come out of your mouth, because that words don't mean bleep. Actions do. Okay? Actions speak louder than words. And the last thing for me is service. Being of service to other human beings. Being of service to the world. Giving back from a world that I, in some ways, sucked from when I was not well. So that's where I am today. I do everything I possibly can to give back. I try to embody these principles in everything that I do. And nobody's perfect. I make mistakes all the time. I say things that aren't nice. I screw things up. But that's okay. Because at the same time, I have this body of evidence that doesn't allow my itty-bitty committee of negative self-talk to get in my way, because I know that I'm not like that anymore, and I know that I'm now like this. And if I live by these guidelines, my life's going to be okay. So that was me rambling on for quite a long time. This is really exciting. My time is kind of up, although I don't have to shut her down right now. I think I'm going to. So yeah, I'll be back again next week. I'll also be back tonight with the Catch the Flavor radio show. The thing is, if we can learn to practice some honesty with ourselves first, that's the first step. That's the first thing we need to do. And hope is there. You will be incredibly surprised by what might happen if you ask for help or if you start to be honest with yourself. Because the pain of not changing is way worse than the pain of changing and the discomfort of asking for help. So we'll be back again. There'll be more info on the website about what we're trying to do here, but this was a good first test run. If anyone was listening, thank you so much. With sincere gratitude, I sign out. And what I'm going to sign out with every time, I hope to remember. So I'm going to put my hand on my heart. I'm going to take a nice deep breath. And I'm going to say, my state of mind starts with me. Peace out, world. Till next time.